So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay in the tournament, and one that was very nearly lost because of a whole rigmarole I had to go through once again with the smaller updates that are coming, and that obviously means that some replays can slip through the cracks. Under normal circumstances I would actually let it go, but I did go through the business of having to revert by basically having a clean install for this one, because I've covered the tournament up to this point, and considering this is a semi-final, this does it needs it really, because otherwise there would be a very noticeable gap in the later stages, which would make it a little bit limp when we came to presumably the grand final, which will be coming up shortly after this. But yes, the other semi-final we saw, of course, in the previous replay, Waffles and Tundra's Fox advance. We shall see who advances from this one as well. We're back on the frozen lake bed, a more open map perhaps than the arena. There's little in the way of terrain, there's a little bit, but not too much, so it's very open. It's also going to be a very quick one, this. I don't think there's going to be much in the way of manoeuvring as there was in the last battle. There's no artillery that can be seen, much more open. We have the rather blinding effect of the snow, which is actually more intense for me than it is for anyone watching on YouTube, I think, because of the compression. It's one of the only times YouTube compression actually helps a little bit. But yes, let's go through the two sides. We have the blue team, which is going to be Tommy and TiesNijhof, who I think actually they were the rank 1 team going in, weren't they? As opposed to Batu and Alexios, but they are going to be the blue team today, and the red team is going to be FFAmuffins and Django. So let's see what this battle has in store. So we'll start off with the blue team, starting off with Tommy. He is going to be playing as Umbar, so Umbar, a good mix of the really heavy elite Black Numenorean infantry. A little bit more of an emphasis in this newer version of the game on the fact that they do have a Corsair underbelly, which does give them more numbers. That sort of split between the lower tier and higher tier classes does give them a little bit more variety, I suppose, in the way that you can approach things, whereas before they were very much about their quality, but it also made them a little bit inflexible. In this sort of situation, though, Corsairs are certainly not going to win you any battles, but the numbers can be very, very useful when you surround your more elite Black Numenorean infantry with them. Big long line of them here as well. Belagai footmen, and in and amongst them we can see the Alcarondas faithful, the golden emblazoned armour there, and then the other more standard riders. Good unit of melee cavalry. We've seen elite and standard cavalry be very, very important in the tourney so far, and mostly, to be fair, we have covered the pitch battles because I don't want to get into the business of repeating the same siege maps over and over again, because that would get stale far quicker, I think, than these kinds of battles would. But yes, the Alcarondas faithful has been one such unit which have been impressive. We saw them in the last battle, actually, in the other semi-final, used to pretty good effect. More Corsairs in behind, plenty of Corsairs here, several lines of them, several layers to this army. Regular Lancers are the sort of thing which have definitely, I think, shown what they can do in this new version of the game throughout this tournament as a whole, and the Ardenheim Lancers should be no different, again with an Umbar twist to them in the sense that they have a little bit more of an emphasis around their durability, especially at range when you consider the heavy armour of the Black Numenoreans and then the good shields as well. But of course, Lancers are always going to be about what sort of damage they can do off their charges. Corsair Blackguards, a nice unit of javelins capable of doing a lot of damage. Just a few volleys are really all that you can expect to get off in a pitched battle, and then you'll need these kind of units to be able to perform in melee as well, which the Corsair Blackguards do have a predisposition for as well. Belagai Pikemen, more Corsairs over here as well. Belagai Pikemen and Alcarondas Legion making up the front line, so a slightly more numerous unit. The Pikes, we might see the more elite Naru Naaru as well, just like we did last time, but again, the same front line that we saw as the centre piece for Umbar in the last semi-final, the Alcarondas Legion being the real fighting force, and then the Pikes to help anchor them in place, and indeed there are the Naru Naaru Sentinels. It's a very effective front line, this obviously heavier Pikes, standard Pikes, and then a very strong unit of line infantry as well. It's a tough nut to crack. You're going to struggle to get through Umbar from the front in those terms. Warlords of Umbar, the heavier unit of lance cavalry that Umbar have. Again, we saw them be very effective in the last battle as well. And more of an emphasis on the cavalry this time around perhaps than any sort of artillery play. And of course our Blackguards out here on the flanks. Not a huge variety. I mean, the cavalry, elite infantry up front, Corsairs dotted around, and then the Blackguards acting as a more damaging force as well. And TiesNijhof is going to be an ally in the shape of Imladris today, so as much as Umbar maybe have stepped away a little bit from being a pure quality focused faction. That's never going to be the sort of thing that Imladris do. Very much know what they're all about. But numbers in Elven terms, obviously we saw Imladris exposed for that in the last semi-final. Is that going to be the case here as well? Swords of Rivendell and the Spears of Rivendell making up the more cost-effective front line for Imladris. All well and good when you can get into melee, especially with a bit of support from your ally, but it is still a relatively low on numbers front line, even compared, even though they are the lowest tier of Imladris units that you can get. The Gwythi Arthand are a very strong unit of spears, one of the most durable units of infantry at keeping themselves alive that the game has to offer. In comparison to some of Imladris' other offerings, they're not the most damaging unit, but in this sort of situation where you're looking to outlast up front, I think that could be one of the ways in which Umbar and Imladris can tie their efforts together. They are a very effective unit at doing that. We saw the Eldarenway Archers be one of the centerpieces of Imladris' efforts last time. It didn't pay off there. They weren't able to do the damage quickly enough. I mean, one of the things that you do get from these guys is the fact that they are very good in melee as well. So no matter what they're doing, they are at least contributing to your efforts, but you need to use them well because they're also extremely expensive. It looks as though there's only one unit of them here though, unlike the several that we saw last time out. So other units being prioritised here, which is probably wise. You can see the Gwythi Myrdain are the most aggressive unit of infantry that Imladris have to offer with their dual hammers as well. Heavy blows which can do damage to all manner of units. And Eldarenway Swordmass as well, obviously more of an emphasis on melee combat, still not very numerous, but that's what all of these standard Rivendell units are for. And then cavalry. We saw the Eldarenway Lancers last time around as well. They did okay, in all fairness. They weren't able to really influence the outcome of the battles as completely as they would have liked, but riding here with the Gwythi Rockdor, it's a lot of cavalry that the blue team have. They need to use it well because they don't have the numbers, even with the Corsairs, to be able to outlast, surely, their opposition. And the red team here, FFAmuffins is playing as Dale. I mean, Dale are an interesting one in an open battle like this. They're very comfortable in a slow-paced battle where archers are king, because they have very good skirmishing lines. But in this sort of situation, you can't rely on your archers having an infinite amount of time to do the damage, though in all fairness, the black shots here are going to be able to do good damage on the approach to anyone that they so choose with their handheld wind lances. Also pretty good in melee as well, but they will need to get some shots off into those Imladris elites. Again, the Bardian Marksmen, a couple of units of them. I mean, they are good in melee, but not to the same extent that the Eldarenway are, but they are cheaper, decent combatants. I mean, not the most damaging unit in the world. It's not going to be, again, will they have the time to really do what they want? We'll see. It's the sort of thing where a few stray volleys can make all the difference in the world. The front line is going to be an interesting one. I mean, the elves don't have a really long range unit, so the Barding Herd will be key in terms of how they can hold Imladris at bay, especially those elite units. Those armour piercing stats that the halberds have are going to be extremely important. Dailian infantry are going to struggle against the equivalent elven units, but they are numerous, and ultimately pretty much everyone in a pitch battle is indulging in this sort of front line where you do have the long weapon unit and the more up close fighter. It's been something which everyone has known about in Medieval 2. This is one of the ways in which you can make a really solid and effective frontline force, so it does give you a solid centre, but it's not a centre that Dale, I think, will win outright against the elves or Umbar, so they're going to have to win in other ways. And the Lake Town Pikemen, I mean, they do have more numbers, they do have some javelins there. There is actually an artillery piece on the field as well. I mean, I can't believe I didn't see it, but the Wind Lancers are actually strangely small. But a unit of ballistae, I mean, it will convince the elves maybe to move forward, but with all their cavalry, I think they would have anyway. Defensive units of cavalry on the flank as well. Dailian paladins and spearmen, and then earls and Dailian cavalry as well. When it comes to sort of walling up and being a bit more defensive, Dale can do that. Of course, that's one of their usual modus operandi. But in this sort of situation where even when you're being defensive, the battle is still fast-paced, it'll be interesting to see how they deal with Imladris. They do have elven allies of their own though. Django playing as Lothlorien, Karas Galadon's Guardians, a very strong unit of pikes of course, but only one unit, so we'll see if they can make the difference. Lothlorien, many of their units, it looks like they're going to be hidden because this is obviously not the entirety of their force. I mean, Umbar haven't brought any of their own archers, even though they are comfortable in a skirmish fight, but they're going to be going for all-out infantry attack, so how much damage the elves can do on the approach is going to be key here. It may just be that they need to go for sheer volume of kills, even if that is Corsairs, and then obviously, much like the Eldarenway, the Galathrim are still very effective in melee when they pull out their elven curved blades. Galathrim riders we've seen be effective in the past many a time, of course, but whether they can actually make full use of their manoeuvrability considering the amount of cavalry on display for the blue team remains to be seen. Going to need the backup of those Galathrun riders as well, and then the Galathrun nobles and Kindred of Celeborn. Maybe, you know, the temptation always with Lothlorien is to go for their 2 bodyguard units, the throwing axes and the Silverthorn archers. I mean, it's a lot of quality, but on this sort of battlefield where you can be made to feel quite small as the elves, especially against a force like Umbar across the way, who have gone full in for aggressive units and not a lot of sitting back for them. We'll see if the elves have the ability to cover every angle. Dale a little bit more well set up in that regard, but without further ado, let's begin. I mean, especially when you consider the Wind Lance over here for Dale, and when you consider the double archers that both Lothlorien and Dale have gone for, the blue team, as it would have been obvious anyway with the amount of cavalry that they have, the amount of mobility, and also upfront punch when it comes to pure melee units, they have the edge. They have to be aggressive. It is the most natural thing in the world for them. Actually, as we see over here already, the Imladris force is on the way forward. Cavalry thinking about moving forward, but then backing off, not able to get into the black shots quickly enough. I mean, perhaps should have seen this coming, but it's obviously going to be a half-speed job, this, considering the amount that's going to be happening all at once. The Eldrenway Lancers won't like being in melee against sword, cavalry and spears, even if they are some of the finer warriors that Elven society has, but it has kept this more dangerous Dalian flank perhaps more occupied, so that the Elven infantry can get involved here up front with the Dalians and the Bardian marksmen sort of slinking away, but Dale moving their front line forwards. But will the Barding herd get situated in time before the elves are able to do really nasty damage to them? That remains to be seen. I mean, Dale have set themselves up quite nicely, but the Wind Lance is now going to struggle to get any decent shots, because rightly Imladris have moved forward with a very aggressive stance, and Umbar doing the same thing, a little bit further behind than Dale perhaps, but Lothlorien did have a little bit more room, and the Silverthorn arrows are also going to knock Umbar off their pace a little bit more. It's one of the ways in which they can be very, very useful, but what is Django going to do here as Umbar bear down on them? Sindar Blade Masters do reveal themselves, as do the Staff Masters. Both tough nuts to crack in melee because of very high melee defense values, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to be enough against the numbers. Certainly against the pikes. I mean, Lothlorien have a unit of more elite pikes than Umbar can muster, but Umbar have got more of them, can blanket the field with more, and this is the catch-22 of playing as the elves. I mean, Imladris on the other side, to an extent, will have that problem against Dale as well, albeit they, taking a more aggressive stance, may be able to force Dale into a few more mistakes. Lorien, with more units revealing themselves, maybe they can make Umbar bite off more than they can chew. But again, the pikes being on the flank is an interesting call, but unfortunately for them, they're in the direct firing line here of the Corsair Blackguards, and this is one of the units which can do damage to even a unit as mighty as this very, very quickly. Pikes and Galathrun warriors revealing themselves. In pure melee terms, they'll do okay against the cavalry, but they won't like a charge from the heavy Umbar horses. And here, I mean, Harbingers of Castamere, the core of the Umbar force, also taking a bit of a beating from the throwing axes, so both sides giving one another a bit of a beating with throwing projectiles. Lorien sort of in a bit of a fighting retreat, really. They need to try and make the battlefield as small as they possibly can so that their quality can deliver them the victory. Certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. They could try and wall up with Dale on that hill, but I don't think they've got enough time anymore. Umbar are very much upon them, and cavalry as well, threatening to slot into the gaps, although, in all fairness, as much as the blue team have the obvious cab advantage in terms of numbers, the red team still finding a few gaps. The Lothlorien cavalry managing to get a good charge here into the Eldrenway. A few of them will start to fall away. And kind of as expected, the Dalian front line is struggling where the elves committed most of their high quality infantry. The Dalian flank with all of the infantry, I mean, the Imladris cavalry has bought a bit of time, but as Dale get their reinforcements across, they can enact a bit of a flanking manoeuvre. I mean, the Blackshot Dragon Slayers could be a real problem. There's the Umbar General as well at the hands of the Staff Masters. That's not ideal. Umbar, I mean, it is difficult to rout them, but not so much the Corsairs. And again, cavalry from in behind. I mean, charging into their own stakes is not ideal. But the Eldarenway, too juicy a target to resist. And it is surprising to me, actually, that the red team are able to get these cavalry positions. But, I mean, both sides are really going more aggressive with their cavalry, which is leading to a game of damage limitation in behind while the front lines do as they will. I think from a Daelian perspective, though, they are in trouble because they are rapidly losing the front line, and Imladris' quality really telling. Both of the high-tier elven units at the centre, very dependable foot soldiers, and Imladris' lower tiers suffer from the low armour that many entry-level elven units do, but when you get them into melee quickly, that isn't really a concern. Umbar pikes on the way forwards. This was the unit of staff masters that ultimately killed the general. It's a strangely lopsided engagement, this, as the Umbar flank continues to wheel around. The pikes now arriving. Lorien need to win this fight, because I don't think the Daelian infantry is going to be able to hold against that Imladris quality for an indefinite period of time. Balagar footman. And the numbers that the Corsairs give you way out wide, they'll come back in. They're not the biggest threat, of course, but it's just another angle that the elves are having to marshal. The archers in behind will be doing damage incrementally, but they don't have the most obvious of targets. The real question is whether or not enough damage will be done to the point where maybe these elven skirmishers can do the business in melee when all is said and done. But that's a slow burn of a tactic, that, as the Ardenium Lancers crunch their way through these elven axemen on the flank. Bit of an even fight, this, especially when Lothlorien have also taken a bit of an aggressive stance over here, their own cavalry. Their pikes did get into melee, they took some damage from the Blackguards, but they did close them down reasonably quickly. Aranaru Sentinels close by. So that's a relatively even engagement. Eldarenway Lance is in trouble against the Daelian cavalry. Lake Town pikemen represent the second wave of Daelian infantry, and they have managed to at least stall the Imladris advance in places, but the Wind Lance crew, you can see, using the same bardiches that the Barding Herd do, albeit in a more aggressive stance, but they're having to go up against Wythy Myrdain, and that is not a particularly great matchup for them. Girls, Spears of Rivendell, Alien Paladins are in amongst things as well. They will be a unit to give the elves pause, but all of these reinforcements coming from Dale, I mean, the numbers are still there for Dale. I think the issue might be that if they do start to fall apart, if they're reliant on sort of basic Lake Town units and out of ammunition skirmishers, then they won't be able to stand against Imladris, but if they can keep some cohesion, the numbers might yet be enough. The Eldarenway Lance is still here, causing problems in the backfield. It's kind of hard to gauge how much damage all this Imladris cavalry has done. I mean, I don't think it's been as impactful as it could potentially have been. That Daelian flank did its job in terms of blunting a very expensive wing of the Imladris army, but in doing so, they were less prepared to deal with the upfront power that Imladris can also provide, and several units of infantry in behind enemy lines as well, which is certainly far from ideal. Wythy Rockdoor still very much alive as well. I don't think the Wind Lance will be playing any further part with regards to artillery. It's the first time we've seen an artillery piece brought and punished quite quickly, I think. It hasn't really paid off for Dale at all, that, but throughout the rest of the tournament, artillery has been the go-to for many a pair. And then the Galathrun Nobles just in behind. Corsairs against Galathrun Nobles is one of the most one-sided engagements that you could ever hope to see in this mod. But let's see how that develops. Staff Masters still alive, showcasing their melee defense prowess. Everywhere they were committed, they're still reasonably healthy, outlasting their opposition. The problem is they're up against pikes. And they're good for standing and fighting for a long period of time, but they won't win you a battle. You need to do that through other means. I mean, the Kindred of Celeborn can certainly offer you that, but on the ends of these Umbar pikes, can they make quick gains? Still got the small matter of these on-rushing warlords of Umbar. I mean, at this point the charge is not avoidable. The lances are down, and that will be Very nicely connected charge, wide as well, so good surface area. That's going to be a tumbling unit size for the Lothlorien archers there. Many kills. That's the sort of damage that elves can scarcely afford to take, especially in a more open battle like this. So the Umbar cavalry has certainly been effective. I mean, the elves don't really have anything to be able to defend themselves from back here, so they're doing reasonably well. They might even end up winning without any sort... If they're able to manoeuvre around the pikes even a little bit, they could collapse those front lines with their quality, but again, they're doing a good job of their cavalry as well. Both sides have been very aggressive with their cav. So they're going all-out attack and sparing no thought for defence, which both sides have had the benefits of that, but that means that when all is said and done, and my archers firing at point blank into the Dalian cavalry. I mean, the Dalian cavalry by nature is a bit more defensive. With the Arthand in here, the Lake Town pikemen fighting in a horribly outnumbered fashion. Bombarding herd routing, the Dalian infantry in the centre is falling, which means Lothlorien may have a few of their elven brethren coming down to say hello momentarily. Dale are doing okay on this flank though. They will win with the Dalian Paladins over here, and certainly with the Black Shots as well, with a bit of ammunition late on, a bit more room to be able to use them as well. It may require some of these Elven cavalry units to go over and try and knock a few more of the numbers out of that unit of Black Shots, in all honesty. Bells of Dale, Dalian cavalry are fleeing. I mean, this is where the basic Elven units can really punch above their weight though. In pure melee terms, even if they lose this flank, they will still end up extracting a heavy toll from Dale. And will those quality units be enough in the long run? And I mean, what will Imladris do? Will they turn around and go after Dale and win their own side exclusively, or will they go down to help Umbar and then 2v1 the remnants of Dale afterwards? I mean, that's the first note, like the hill up there where Imladris have won is the first out-and-out victory on the field. Elsewhere, on the other side of the Dale Imladris engagement and the entirety of Umbar versus Lothlorien, there is still very scattered skirmishes going on, really, brawls all throughout the field. Staff Masters trying their best to stop things falling into disrepair completely. Again, like I said, they need a bit of damage dealing around them. I mean, the Sindar Blade Masters will offer that, collapsing in from the side against the Naru and Aru Sentinels. For all their numbers in melee here, Umbar, it hasn't been easy going against the elves, showcasing their quality and their damage. I mean, Lothlorien up close, both with throwing projectiles and with melee weaponry. The damage Lothlorien can do is very, very scary. And Umbar may end up losing this, actually, even with the cavalry support they've been running. Corsairs are fleeing. All of the ranged elven units that are strong in melee definitely showcasing their abilities here, but the Imladris infantry is on its way down here, seeing maybe Lothlorien as a real threat that need dealing with. Lothlorien warriors still here, ready to block their advance. Eldraenway archers spraying flaming arrows over here, but perhaps a little bit more likely to hit their own men. Waithy Mirdain now arriving. I mean, this area where Lothlorien had almost won completely. I think those Naru Sentinels may still lose most of their unit size, but the Waithy Mirdain are quite a different proposition to a unit of buckled pikes. Indeed, it's Lothlorien who are going to need to rely on a bit of pike range to try and keep those hammers at bay. There's a few Umbar cavalry buzzing around, probably been the most effective part of the Umbar army, actually. And the damage and the charges they have been able to get into the elves may yet cause Lothlorien to run out of fuel, as it were. I think it's time we went back up to 1 speed, and the Dalians just don't have the quality. I mean, some of the Imladris infantry came over here to reinforce, including the very durable Waithy Arthand spears, and the Black Shots were killed as a result. The Paladins, with what few men they have left at their disposal, rallying around, but Imladris will win over here, and I think as a result of this, I think Lothlorien would do very, very well to pull off a victory at this point. In fact, I'd say it was probably impossible. Imladris still with a bit of quality, still with a bit of extra manpower, still cavalry as well from Umbar. So, not allowing the ranged component of the red team armies to really spread its wings here has ultimately paid dividends in the end, but maybe going that archer heavy might not have been the answer. It's a very open map, this, the Frozen Lake, though. If you're on the arena, you have a bit of terrain, maybe it's a little bit more where you can manoeuvre a bit, but here, wide open plains, little in the way of terrain variations. A reasonably sized infantry force that you can use to cover grounds and cavalry. There's a lot to be said for that, but the margins by which, I mean, if it had just been Lothlorien Umbar, Lothlorien might have been able to pull that off with their quality, getting in and around. It would have depended on how well Umbar used the remnants of their cav, I think, but the rest of the Elven force completely destroying. I mean, still leaving the Dalian Paladins behind. But I guess an isolated unit of a little over 20 Dalian Paladins is not the main concern. If you can squash Lothlorien and what remains of them underfoot, you have won, and you have booked your place in the grand final. Swords of Rivendell onrushing now, going after the Kindred. The rank and file Imladris units have definitely shown their worth today as well. I think most people think Imladris is only about their upper echelon, but if you allow the regular rank and file, when we see them in siege battles, their lack of armour, especially when they're on the attack, can be exploited a bit. But in this sort of situation, get them up close and personal quickly. That's where you can see the fact that they still have that real close quarters quality. Even against a reasonably well prepared Dalian front line, they weren't able to get outdone. Still Smalcarondas Legion. I mean, I think Imladris are probably the stars of the show here. Umbar moving forward and going after Lothlorien, but it was a pretty grisly affair for them. They did what they set out to do ultimately, and they have broken the back of the Lorien defence, but considering the shape of the engagement, I think Umbar would have been hoping maybe for a more positive outcome, especially considering their cavalry, but I was going to show that Elven quality can carry your ways even in a situation that isn't ideal for them. And Imladris' reinforcements, also the way Imladris won in the middle up on that hill was really significant as well, I think. If Dale hadn't have committed all those stronger units, especially the spears and black shots to the flank though, the Imladris cavalry might have paid off, so it's a bit of a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's a bit of a hard matchup as well for Dale in all fairness when Imladris are coming for your throat. Lack a few damage dealing options maybe, especially when it comes to their melee capabilities, and I think that was exploited here by TS and his Elven force. Catherine Nobles being hounded, Spears of Rivendell way off in the backfield over there. I wonder what they're doing. Auto-pathing, like chasing after a unit that had fled presumably. But Tommy and TS were the best performers in the group stage, so I guess it stands to reason that they should get into the grand final where they will face Waffles and Tundra's Fox. They would go in as favourites based on past performance and form. As runway archers have been shooting off in that direction for a while, which means they've been targeting the paladins. One player admits defeat, that's surely... No, it's actually the Dalian player. The remains of the Kindred of Caliborn will be the last unit on the field going up against the Whitey Myrdain and primarily an Imladris force. There really isn't much left of Umbar at all. The odd battered and bruised unit here and there, a few units of cavalry, but it will be the High Elves that mostly occupy the field come the end of this. And there we have it. Deserving winners as well. Certainly a faster and more frenetic fight than the previous semi-final. But, you know, on this kind of map as well, I mean, it does change what you can do a little bit. Yeah, you can see the amount of damage that Imladris did, but you also have to take into account the army sizes. Both Umbar and Dale significantly more numerous than their Elven counterparts, and both of them were facing off against each other, so the Elves able to fill their boots in terms of kills far more than their opposite numbers from a human perspective, but everyone had their role to play. And yeah, I think compositions here did a decent amount of the work for TS and Tommy, not to take too much away from the way they played, of course. You've still got to utilise your cavalry, you've still got to move forward with purpose, and they did that. But I think the decision to go as archer heavy as they did ultimately for the red team was a bit of a problem. I mean, Lothlorien got away with it more, and you'd expect them to, because their units can get involved in melee more easily, especially against some of the entry-level Umbar units. You know, you could even argue that going for both bodyguard units, considering how strapped for cash you are as the elves, might have been a bit much, but Imladris did the same. In fact, Imladris went, well, they did exactly the same, 3 bodyguard units apiece, and it worked out pretty well for both of them. But against the numbers, Umbar going full infantry. Dale, on the other hand, Bardian Marksman, the Wind Lance, you know, 2 units of Bardian Marksman and a Wind Lance, that adds up to a decent amount. You know, what would you have brought if you were Dale otherwise? I mean, like I said, they don't have the most damage dealing capabilities in their army, but the sword masters, you would say, I mean, heavy swordsmen would do a bit better against the elves, especially when you consider you could mix them in with the rest of your front line. You know, maybe you do go for the Daily and Royal Guard, go for a far more defensive setup. I mean, we haven't really seen defence rewarded too much in these pitch battles in this tournament, but I think when you're Dale, you stick with what you're good at, especially when you consider the quality that Imladris brings to the table. Maybe that would have been the answer, but you would have needed Lothlorien to also play that way as well to really wall things off. It's an interesting one. I think it's a bit of a puzzle, but ultimately they brought what they brought, and TS and Tommy played well and certainly were good value for the win in the end, and they advance. I believe there will be a third place playoff game as well, which means it's not the end of the road for Django and FFAmuffins. They will face Alexios and Batu if there is a third place playoff, as I suspect. But TS and Tommy will meet Waffles and Tundra's Fox in the final to contest the gold and silver medals. So yeah, big thank you to all the players involved in this one. I believe actually it was Alexios who sent this one to me, one of the tournament's main organisers after all. And yes, it remains to be seen what the next one we see how this is. I think it will be a third place playoff, and then we'll get on to the grand final as well. The rigmarole that I had in getting this one to work has maybe, I think maybe another channel update is probably in order, especially given how the last number of weeks have gone. And there are a few things that have crystallised in my mind really, and that means that need to have another rethink, I think, of the of how things are going to move forward with the channel. I think I need to sort of re-strategize how I'm going to be doing this, by hook or by crook really. We'll see. It may be that the next video that comes out, because it will be a midweek one, that might be a channel update video. It rather depends on if I actually decide on the best way of moving forward or not. But yeah, that and the tournament battles are really the only thing in the pipeline at the moment, at least I have in my possession. So yeah, we'll see. I don't want to waffle on too much about that because it's only really relevant if I decide on what to do, but do look out for that if it does come around, because it will be important information regarding all of this. But other than that, big thank you to the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.